What is up, baseball fans in the Mile High City? Aniello Piro here with Mile High Sports, and the big game is over. Pitchers and catchers have started to report, which means baseball season is upon us. And look, I know the Colorado Rockies are in an interesting state right now with the organization, but I'm a baseball guy, and my guest to my left, Drew Creasman, covers the Colorado Rockies for us right here at Mile High Sports. And there's no one that's better of keeping it a buck and a stack, I feel like, than Mr. Drew Creasman. Drew Creasman's always keeping it honest, a little bit on the optimistic side, but quite frankly, my friend, I think the Rockies, the fan base, the organization, you serve a very, very important role in this Rockies community.
Hey, I appreciate that, Anilo. I also think the word interesting did a lot of work there for the Rockies season and where they are right now. But yeah, I think it's pretty easy to be cynical about this team. We all do it from time to time, including myself, and the facts speak for themselves. But yeah, no one needs me to tell them that they lost 103 games last year or that the team is generally not well run. That being said, sometimes people do need a little help finding the things that are worth rooting for, worth putting a ball game on for. And I like being the guy that can help people find those things.
Yeah, and look, it wasn't all doom and gloom. Yes, they did lose 100 games last year, but Nolan Jones ascending as one of the best not just young outfielders, one of the best outfielders, period, in Major League Baseball, right? We get Charlie Blackmon coming back for another season. What is Chris Bryant going to do? So, like, I understand that maybe the outlook isn't great for them this season, but I think that there's a little bit more optimism heading into the 2024 regular season than perhaps 2023. Because I remember sitting here, chatting with you before the season started last year, and we all were kind of expecting probably nothing, too hot. And I think there's a similar expectation this year, a little bit more of a youth movement, though, that I think we're going to see on the diamond for the Rocks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know most people probably tuned out for the last 2 months last year. Again, completely understandable. But those who were watching did see some of the things you saw or that you mentioned, like Nolan Jones was absolutely fantastic and really is one of the things to get most excited about right now on the Rockies. Brenton Doyle emerging as the best defensive center fielder in baseball in his rookie season. A lot to work on with the bat there, but that gets into some of the things you can maybe get excited about for this year, right? Seeing if a guy like that can improve. Rookie shortstop Ezekiel Tovar, who spent most of the year last year as the youngest player in all of Major League Baseball, tied a Rockies rookie record for games played, for doubles. He's matching up with guys like Todd Helton and Troy Tulowitzki on all these Rocky rookie records and doing it at a younger age. And so while, yeah, I ultimately don't think, to skip to the very end, I guess, that the record is going to be much improved this season, I do think we're going to see a lot of small individual player improvements that are going to start to build a foundation for the future.
And I think, I think back to before the Rockies went on that couple season run where they made the postseason, right? And you were able to get invested in the growth of Trevor Story, able to get invested in the growth of Nolan Arenado, Charlie Blackmon, that core. And you mentioned it, Brenton Doyle, Nolan Jones. Like, you have a little bit of an identity, Ezekiel Tovar, that I think should, be a reason for the fans to get exciting, right? Because think about it, when Nolan Arenado was here with Troy Tulowitzki and Carlos Gonzalez, those teams weren't making the playoffs.
Right.
But there was interest.
There was at one point an infield that was Nolan Arenado, Troy Tulowitzki, DJ LeMahieu, and Justin Morneau. And those guys were bad because the pitching was bad. Those guys were good. That team was bad, right? And so I do think we're in an absolutely similar place right now. Like you said, I see to the 2016 season, which was right before that run when Trevor Story was a rookie. David Dahl also, while it didn't pan out in the long term for him, he was a thing. We saw early John Gray, Kyle Freeland, and we didn't know that team was going to become a back-to-back postseason team. And I think that's kind of where these guys are now. On the pitching side, it's a little more difficult to find that excitement. I will admit that's more in the minors. But from a position player standpoint, it is starting to remind me a lot of that core when it was Nolan, Trevor, a young Charlie Blackmon. Remember young Charlie Blackmon before the beard?
Yes, I do remember. Well, I like to play the numbers, and I got to throw it out here. If you think the Rockies can win 60 games this year, 6-0, then the over is for you, because looking at the over-under here for regular season wins from our good friends over at Superbook Sports, 59.5 is the regular season win total for the Colorado Rockies.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. Look, if they have better health than they did a year ago and some of these younger guys get better, I think they can beat that. The problem is that the pitching is in such a tenuous position. We saw it last year. I don't think the true talent of the team that suited up on day one of last year was a 100-loss team. But you lose Marquez for the whole year, you lose Sensatella for the whole year, and you are a 100-loss team. And they're in a similar situation now where the rotation is just Kyle Freeland, Austin Gomber, the new guy, Cal Quantrill, and then a ton of question marks. And so you have one or two injuries and you're back in that spot where you're going out and signing the Chase Andersons and the Chris Flexens of the world.
Right.
And that's why they ended up losing 100 games. As instead of 96, don't get me wrong.
Big difference, guys.
Not instead of going to the postseason or anything, just instead of, losing a handful fewer. So they're in that same spot. If the pitching stays healthy and the offense outperforms, they can actually be a decent team for a little while. They're still, I don't think, are going to be anywhere close to contending even for the very last wild card spot or even being 500 or anything like that. But I do think we're going to see those improvements. And I do think the odds are against them losing 100 games again, even though it's still definitely on the table.
Yeah, we'll have to see how it shakes out. But a new season, I feel like, always brings a little bit of optimism. I know you were chatting with me before we sat down. I think you're planning a trip down to good old Salt River Fields. And let me just say this, for all the baseball fans, Rockies fans or not, get down to Arizona for spring training.
Go. You got to go. It's the best.
It's like, spring break for adults. Salt River Fields,
Yes.
They share the facility with the Arizona Diamondbacks. I have been told it's one of, if not the best spring training facility in baseball.
Yeah.
I've been to some other facilities, and from what I can tell, that holds up. I mean, seriously, you want a good, get into a game for a couple of bucks, enjoy a hot dog. It's cold here in Colorado.
Yeah.
Warm up down in Scottsdale. Cannot recommend that enough. But what are some of the keys that you've got your eye on here? And I know there was one big topic of discussion in the offseason. The Athletic gave out their grades for offseason, progress and whatnot. And the Rockies were, I believe, one of only two teams along with the Miami Marlins that received an F grade. Yeah. So they didn't really address the rotation. To your point, maybe they're banking on some of these younger guys developing, Chris Bryant developing and settling in with this team. Let's start there. What's kind of your general expectations and what are you looking for when you go down to spring training?
Yeah, I think one of the big things is, have they fully embraced the rebuild? Like I said, I think a lot of people see 100 losses as the kind of ultimate sign of failure. And for me, having covered a lot of failing Rockies teams in my 12 years of doing this, I actually saw it as a sign that they have finally recognized the reality of where they are and that they are embracing building toward the future. And I think the best analogy that I can come up with is if you've got a giant tanker ocean liner steaming in the wrong direction, you can't just throw down anchor and immediately flip that thing around, right? You have to, in a reasonable manner, slow down the bad things, get, doing things like they've hired, I know this isn't stuff that fans typically get excited about, but they had a really good scout hire this offseason. They poached a fantastic scout out of the Minnesota system that's found a ton of great players, underrated players. Those are the kinds of things at this point of a rebuild. But the bigger things are things like what they did last year, trading away veterans, getting younger, focusing on the pitching, not signing guys to big long-term contracts like they did with Chris Bryant, not repeating that mistake with another player because you think it might help you win 10 or 12 more games next year. That doesn't get them anywhere to win 10 or 12 more games this year. They should be building for 25 and beyond. And I think that means that this year has got to be a lot about making sure that every move they make, whether they're bringing veterans in or not, is built toward that, committing to the long-term rebuild and being willing to trade some of these guys off again, even if it means having to swallow some money or trading some fan favorites like Ryan McMahon or Brendan Rodgers, who it may just be that the calendar isn't right for those guys. And it's going to be the team of, as we've talked about, Jones, Tovar, Doyle, and maybe a Zach Veen or these other guys that are going to come up, right? So I think that's where I just want to see them not panic because they've been losing so much and say, oh, we just want to win 10 or 15 more games because it's less embarrassing.
Yeah, you don't want to be stuck in purgatory, which it feels like they've kind of been stuck in for the last 3 or 4 seasons, right?
Absolutely.
And we got to talk about Chris Bryant here because, look, you were never going to replace the star power and love that Nolan Arenado had here.
Sure.
but the returns have not been great in Colorado for Chris Bryant. I mean, he's 259 batting average, only 15 home runs, 122 games played, 500 plate appearances for someone that got a massive deal
Yeah.
from a team that is not usually, known to be in the pool for some of these guys. I know you have a little bit of a relationship with Chris. You've spent some time in and around him in the clubhouse. What are you expecting from Chris Bryant this season for the Rockies?
I do think he's going to be better. I think obviously, like, I'm not a doctor, so I can't get, that's the hardest thing here is my general take on Chris Bryant is this. I think a lot of people have written him off way too early. I think some of the things that are absolutely true, everything that you just talked about, the statistics, the injuries, the contract, all of that is true. I think some people have gone a little bit too far in suggesting that he no longer has passion or fire for the game. I think those people are going to be proven wrong if he can stay healthy, because I also see one of the smartest hitters that I've ever seen at the plate still as he's struggling. He's finding ways to do certain things, small things, and they have to ultimately pan out in the numbers. But Chris Bryant isn't as old or quite as injury prone as it seems to Rockies fans, because that's all he's been since he's been here, right? And so I think it's hard when you just haven't seen it. That said, at 32, I don't think this guy, who's an MVP, a Rookie of the Year, a World Series champion, in a place where it was very difficult to win a World Series, and he was the best player on that team, make no mistake about that either. He was absolutely that team's MVP. I don't think this guy has lost his ability to play the game of baseball.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I do want to preface, I am one of those people, not that I questioned his passion for the game or anything like that. Like, I don't think he's trying to mail it in, but I do wonder why, if he was, 29 going on 30 years old, why do you sign with a team like the Rockies? And I don't mean that as a slight, but it's like, if you're in the prime of your career, if you want to keep winning, let's just be frank, you're not going to do that here. And so, he won a World Series in Chicago. He played highly competitive baseball for a long time. But you know what I will say, Drew? I'm hoping that the injuries and, the downplay and whatnot, maybe that puts a chip on his shoulder. And I think he does have a chip on his shoulder already, but maybe it is like, I'm still that guy. Yeah. I'm still KB. I can still be capable of leading a team or being a face of a franchise for an organization.
Yeah, I think he believes that. I think that's part of why he really was getting in with, like, getting Nolan Jones the Rolex for having the 2020 season or whatever, that kind of thing. He still sees himself as a leader on this team. And, I do want to say this about that. Todd Helton said at his ceremony just recently, I would rather have gone to the World Series with the Colorado Rockies than won the World Series with another team. And I think if you're Chris Bryant and you've already won with the Chicago Cubs, you're not going to go and join the Yankees or the Dodgers or the Cardinals. The Cardinals?
Yes.
After what he's,
Yeah.
I think he's one of these guys who finds more pride in winning with a team that's not expected to win. Chicago is never expected to win. And that put a chip on his shoulder. And, when you're not healthy, you can't do much about that. But I think you're right. There is a chip on his shoulder. And I think he takes a certain amount of pride in trying to find ways to win in places where people don't expect it. Charlie Blackmon's another one of those guys. I can say for certain that he is of that mindset.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you, and it's going to be interesting to see how this all shakes out. Let's look at the current iteration of this team, right? You've got some of the pitchers that are working their way back from injury, but that always seems to be kind of the common denominator with this team. Obviously, Kyle Freeland's still here. Austin Gomber's still here. They bring in Chris Flexen, Peter Lambert. What's kind of your expectation for not only the starting rotation, but the bullpen?
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's going to be Freeland, Gomber, Cal Quantrill, which is an interesting addition, and I actually think he has low-key a chance to be pretty decent. In a similar way, to remember Chad Cool a couple
of years ago?
Yeah, that was cool.
Very cool.
It's right there. Come on.
Gotta do it.
You have to. RIP to all the story puns. But it just, I think he has a chance to be pretty decent. There are two guys, if I could maybe single out, well, let's do three from a younger standpoint. Noah Davis, Ryan Feltner, and you mentioned Peter Lambert. These are all guys who dealt with not just injuries, but freakish injuries. One of them got hit in the head. It's like stuff like that happens, right? But these are all guys who I think, back to that chip on the shoulder, have a lot to prove. It's weird to be a young guy who's also before you've really had a chance to prove yourself, feel like you've already been written off. And I think all three of those guys feel that way. They've all got different mixes of things that might make them good. Feltner's got some pretty good stuff, and the strikeout things, if he can hone in, he could be really good. Davis and Lambert are more guys who are good pitchability, don't walk a ton of guys, game managers who've shown some success. And I think there could be some fun. If the team outperforms expectations, if they beat that number on the super books, then I think it's going to be because of those young pitchers being better at the bottom of the rotation than people are expecting.
Yeah, and I know that was one of the reasons why the Athletic ended up giving them that F grade, is the lack of additions to the rotation and the bullpen. But, nothing new in regards to the Rockies with the optimistic thinking. We'll have to see how it shakes out. But they do have a youth movement going on. A couple more before we get out of here, my friend. Let's talk about those young position players. Specifically, we talked about Nolan Jones. We've talked about Brenton Doyle. Are we going to see Zach Veen? But more importantly, what's going on with Eleris Montero?
Yeah. Okay, so this is one of the places where I have a very difficult time defending or understanding what this team is doing with this guy. I know that a lot of it comes down to they're not happy with his defense, which is understandable and I think correct, but he's mashing at AAA. Sometimes guys hit at AAA and fans get really excited and like, call him up. Finding a way to give even more time and more leeway to players like Eleris Montero are the types of things that the Rockies need to do to prove that they are fully committed to this rebuild.
Yeah, and he's one of the players that you kind of get excited about. And I know the returns weren't exactly fantastic all the time last season, but this is, if you're a Rocky fan, one of the players you have to put your stock into, right? Because I believe he was part of the Nolan Arenado trade, if I remember correctly.
That's right.
And we know where Austin Gomber's kind of at, a little hit or miss. So you hope that Montero can come to fruition. We talked about Nolan Jones and Brenton Doyle. They're doing their thing. You mix in a Zach Veen and some of these other young guys. And to where we started this video, hopefully you have a crop of 4 or 5 young up-and-coming players that could be the future of this franchise.
Yeah. And at the very least, and I know not everyone loves this point, but they should be fun to watch, right? And I know that not every, at the end of the day, wins are fun to watch. Like, I get that. I understand that. But if you are recognizing early and fairly that this team is going to struggle to get wins, but you love baseball and you are looking toward the future, I do think there's going to be a lot of those types of guys. There's Yanquiel Fernandez and Drew Romo and Chase Dollander and all of these guys that are top 100 prospects, Jordan Beck. And there's a long list of guys to actually get excited about, in addition to the ones who've already made their debuts. So I do think that's on the horizon for this team, and it's something that's going to be fun to watch.
Well, I'm a baseball guy. It's my favorite sport. It's been my first love for a long, long time. We know that Drew Creasman's a baseball guy, so we're going to get excited either way, but Drew's going to have you covered all season long with coverage of your Colorado Rockies at milehighsports.com, and make sure to follow us on the social media accounts as well at Mile High Sports. Let us know what you think of the new setup. We're working on some new stuff, and you'll see a lot more of Drew Creasman's work moving forward as we get into the spring and the summertime. But for Drew Creasman, I'm Aniello Piro signing off from the Mile High Sports Studios. Let's see what this season has in store for the Rockies.